I would say that overuse of the mind is the number one problem for most business owners and for most leaders and for most people who've been at least well educated in the West. Our education fundamentally ignored anything except the mind, and it actually taught us to put the mind in the driver's seat at every level. And so it really is, there's considerable learning to do in a way to open up these other parts of ourselves. Not because we really need to learn how to use them. We're born using them. We actually know how to use them really well. But because we have worked so hard to cover them over. And so even after you've done many years of learning about energy and spirituality and these kinds of things, you can so easily find yourself defaulting to overthinking whenever you feel under pressure. And that's why it's a topic that comes up again and again and again. And it's really important, if you get yourself into a state of thinking too much again, not to beat yourself up about that, but simply to recognize that we live in an energy field, a collective consciousness that is very, very mind focused, and that hasn't really taught us how to use our minds well, and is still not teaching people how to use their minds well. And so now we also live in an environment where our minds are massively overstimulated. One of the things that I've become conscious of is because of the huge increase, certainly in my lifetime, of university education, so higher level education, and at the same time because of the growth of the internet, and so our access to platforms through which we can share information, there's been an absolute explosion in the amount of information we have access to, which is almost entirely mentally produced information. And so you could literally spend all day, every day, if you have a mind to, exploring and learning about what other people think about just about anything in life. And that's amazing in a way. It's absolutely incredible if you think that when I was young, we didn't have that. We had libraries, which were very clumsy and cumbersome to use, really, compared to what we've got used to now. You had books. You had books, many of which were old books. There wasn't such a focus at that time on new books coming out. There were classics, there was a lot of focus on reading the classics at school. There was no emphasis whatsoever in looking for new literature. That came a whole lot later, which is really interesting. I never thought about that before. And now, every single day, new books are being released, and many of them, our attention is drawn to them. There are new blogs, there's new information all the time. It's an absolute feast for the mind. And that's not a bad thing in itself. It only becomes a bad thing if we get too hooked into that and we lose touch with all the other sources of information that we have access to. What I'm finding, I'm seeing more and more people who are learning to tune into their heart because they find it gives them more accurate information. I've mentioned several times recently Anita Moorjani, who is the woman who died of cancer, more or less. She went into a coma, I think, for about 30 hours. And she experienced having a near-death experience where she crossed over to the other side and then made the decision to come back again. The doctors considered that she was actually on the point of dying. and they'd completely given up on her. And she talks a lot about self-love, and she talks about making decisions with your heart. And I listened to her a couple of days ago talking about the very challenging situation that people get into when they have a really serious illness, and they can get absolutely overwhelmed by all the information that they receive. And she described meeting somebody who had been diagnosed with, I think, stage 3 breast cancer. And she said the most challenging thing was that there were people who really cared for her and loved her and told her she must trust her doctors. And there were people who really cared for her and loved her who said she should never trust her doctors and that she should try this approach or that approach. And I remember many years ago meeting a woman in the same situation. And she'd come to see me to see if I could help her with her cancer. And she, at the end of it, I talked about what we could do in the business I was running at the time, which was called the Energy Bank. And at the end, she broke down in tears because she was so overwhelmed by the contradicting and contrasting information she was receiving. And it stuck in my mind because she said, I've even been advised that I should be drinking my own urine. And I just have no idea how to make a decision. And that's a classic case that perhaps many of us can relate to. And exactly the same thing can happen to you in business where you're facing a really big challenge and you really don't know what direction to take. And you listen to people's advice and there are so many conflicts and contrasts in that advice. And you don't know which way to head, and whichever way you look, because you don't have enough information or you have so much information that it's impossible to make a decision. So whichever way you look feels like, if I go this way, I'm ignoring those people and that advice and that information and that possibility. If I go that way, I'm ignoring these people and their advice and the possibilities offered by that. And it's really encapsulated in that medical situation. If I take the traditional treatment, the mainstream treatments, I've heard so many horror stories of side effects, of people not surviving, of having a really horrendous lifestyle as a result. If I take the natural way, I've heard so many horror stories of people not surviving. I don't know which one to take because there seem to be so many and there's no clarity about what I should do. And so whichever way you go, you feel like you're going to lose and you can't find the win. And it's exactly the same in business, but it's especially poignant when your life is at stake. And this is where we really see that the mind is not the place to be making these kinds of decisions. The mind can describe the decision. It can form it into a kind of clarity that enables you to take action, but it is unable to actually make the decision. This is something that we've not really been made aware of through our education. There is a guy called Dr. David Hawkins who says quite simply, the mind is incapable of discerning the truth. And I've found that to be the case. It simply is not the job that the mind is able to do. We have been taught decision-making processes where, for example, you line up the advantages and the disadvantages of all the decisions, and you try to use your mind, a rational approach, to make that decision. Now, that's better than making a decision based in fear and negative emotion. It's also better than making a decision based in hope and a rather cloudy optimism or positive, being positive. But there is a more powerful way, and that is to tune into your heart and to sense or to feel which decision is nurturing and kind and loving for yourself. And as you tune into your heart, you're also tuning into your energy senses as well. But the heart really needs to be at the heart of this, because that's where it belongs. When you tune into your heart, when you tune into your deeper, more loving center of yourself, to feel what each of the decisions that you have in front of you feels like, you can literally tune into that option. It's rather like tuning in a radio. You can tune into the feeling of it. And there are a few things that you can ask yourself. First and foremost, does this decision feel like one that I would be making from a place of love, first and foremost towards myself? If I take that direction with my health, or if I take that direction with my business, or if I take that direction with my relationship, does that feel like a direction that is loving towards myself? And if it doesn't, don't take it. Because if you don't love yourself, if you deny yourself the fundamental fuel of your life, whatever decision you take will not take you in any direction that you really want to go. And so consider all your options to see what seems loving and nurturing and caring towards yourself. Consider combinations of options. Consider all the possibilities that you have available to you. And if none of them feels loving, and that is sometimes the case, then what I recommend you do is open yourself up and say, I am looking for the right solution for me, and I haven't found it yet. So I'm open. I want to research more. I need to find something better than anything that I've been offered so far. And when you open yourself up to the option that's going to be really good for you, loving towards you, the first thing is I can guarantee you that if it's loving towards you, that is going to take care of everybody else as well. Because something that's loving towards you is not going to be cruel or unkind to other people. Because if you're unkind to other people and they hurt you as a result, that's not loving towards yourself. It may not be what other people want on the surface of things, but we're tuning into something deeper here, something more powerful. And so when you open yourself up like that and say, I didn't find anything that's really, I can really decide from a place of love, and I want that, I'm looking for that, that's when life starts to really work for you. And something will come up, an option will come up, a possibility will come up, something will show up in your life, or somebody will say, hey, have you thought of doing this and this? Or you'll read something somewhere that will give you that little jolt of, maybe that's it. That feels right to me. That feels really nurturing and kind and full of everything that I really care about in my life. That feels like a direction I would love to take my business. That feels like a direction that's really going to work for my relationship and for everybody who's involved with that relationship. And my experience has been that there is always a direction you can take that is loving towards yourself and towards others. And most people who haven't found that, who end up taking a decision with a heavy heart, and that's literally the expression we would use, with a heavy heart, have simply not opened themselves up to find the decision that lights them up. Simply because they didn't know that that was possible. They've forgotten. And so they've decided to opt for one of the things that's in front of them. I've heard so many amazing stories of people when they open themselves up for a better option, and then miraculously, magically, something appears in their life that they'd never come across before, they'd never thought of before, they'd never known that you could make this particular combination before, or a person walks into their life who has the answer that they're looking for. And if you don't open yourself up to that, it's very, very difficult to find it. And if you do open yourself up to it, it's extraordinary how easy it is to find it. And if you're under time pressure, if you're being put under pressure by doctors or by experts in business or in your relationship, if your relationship is under such pressure, maybe the other person is threatening to walk out, or something awful feels like it's going to happen, then you need to open yourself up to finding that loving, nurturing possibility really fast. And if you need it fast, and you're open to it coming fast, it can come fast, really fast. And so this is where you start to put your mind into the place where it can do its job really well. Once your heart has chosen a direction and you've opened up to all those energy senses that give you much more subtle information. So the energy senses give you the rich feeling of what that option could be like. Let me describe that a little bit more, how you do that. When you learn how to tune into your subtle energy senses, you can tune into an option, let's say a possible direction or a possible decision, and not only feel whether that's a loving option, but you can feel much more about it. You can feel whether it gives you a bright future or not. You can sense some of the information about it. Let me think of an example. For example, if you're sensing into a direction for your business, you can sense, does this expand my business or shrink it? Does this bring me more money or less money? Is this ultimately going to be more profitable, or does it feel as though there's a sense of limitation around the profitability? Is this going to support my team, really? Or is it actually going to hurt my team? You can ask any question you like and get a sense of the answer. Is this going to take the business in a direction that will give it long-term survival? Or will it thrive in the long term? Or is this going to take it in a direction that will give me short-term gains, but long-term threat? Is this direction going to bring me opportunities that I can't see yet? Or is it going to limit my opportunities? You can start by asking yes-no questions. Just sense whether there's a yes or a no. And you can grow that ability to ask questions about the quality of experience that any option will give you in the future. And this takes you into a deep and subtle feeling place, not a thinking place. Your mind is necessary to ask the questions, to form the questions, to crystallize them into good questions. This is where the mind is super powerful, because if you ask a good question, you get very high quality information. If you ask a bad question, if you're lazy with your mind, don't do the work to ask a good question, you get very poor quality information, and it's not very helpful. So that's where you can use your mind in the formation of a decision, is to ask good questions and allow really rich information, feeling information, to be brought to you. And your mind can take control of making sure that every option is considered. It's very good at that. But in terms of making the decision, then there's again the requirement for the mind to become crystal clear about asking the right question. Asking a question so that you frame the decision to get the right outcome. And then once you've made a decision, your mind becomes super important in formulating that decision and formulating all the mini decisions that come out of it, all the mini steps of your plan, of your strategy, but enabling you still to stay open to the richness of the subtle energy feelings and to the direction, the loving direction of choosing your heart's direction, what you would love to do, rather than what you're doing because you're afraid. And I haven't talked in this talk about the soul and connecting with your purpose, but that's the other part that you can also bring into this decision-making process. If you follow your heart and the subtle energy information, most of that will be taken care of, because what you would love to do, what you would love to experience, will naturally align you with your purpose. But if you're aware of your purpose, of course, it's really great to be aware of how any decision you make aligns you and takes you in the direction of your purpose. This is the way that you can find balance for your mind, and you can let go of overthinking and overworking your mind so that you become a far more balanced person. But much more important is you have a much richer and a much better feeling life.